Welcome to Talking in Stations. This is Matterall, here with you on January 15th, the Ides of January. We've made it. And we're going to talk about EVE Online today. It's just me. Oh, am I really muted? Check. Voice comes through there. Dude, I'm so going to throw you out for tricking me because I'm sensitive to mistakes. All right. We'll keep it in there just for comedy. All right. So this is January 15th. I am Matterall again, and we're going to talk about some EVE Online. We'll actually be looking for things because I didn't expect to stream today. I had earlier appointment that ended early, so I was able to get home in time and thought, why not? We should do a warm-up act for Open Comms later, which I'll probably visit. If I look exhausted, it's just my lighting. I did get like very little sleep last night, but yeah. I'll try to liven up. Okay, here we go. Well, one of the biggest things that has hit the news lately is this here State Raven, which is very rare, sold. So let's start at the top here. The Raven State issue is maybe the rarest ship in the game next to the exceedingly rare gold magnet, which is it a frigate? I think it's a frigate. It's gold. It's worth, well, there's really no price tag on that ship. And the the Raven State issue is right there with those gold and silver magnets. This is maybe even more priceless, more expensive, and even rare. I believe there were only 4 given out, and they're historic because they actually played an important role inside of the Alliance tournament, like number 2 or number 3. And so there's been some drama and mystery around these things. So these things are incredibly, incredibly expensive, but it's just their rarity. So they may not actually be expensive in the game as far as the machine is concerned, but the players know that this thing is very rare. And so you actually saw this, I think this exact bird, this exact Raven, was put on sale when the Hypernet came out in December. That was last December, so about a year ago. And they put it on the market for like 4 trillion. And it was, of course, divided up into like 512 lots. And so you could buy a lot, and the lots were like, I don't know, 7, 9, 11 billion per lot or something like that, with a 1 in 500 chance of winning this thing. It didn't actually make it. So what that means is it never sold because they didn't sell enough lottery tickets for the sale to go through. So it defaulted back to the owner. The owner had it. I think it's Blue Melon there. And now he's selling it or has sold it again. So this specific Raven is pretty interesting. It was, how should I say, the biggest flop in Hypernet that we will ever see, because I don't think anybody has any asset worth 4 trillion. It was 4.2 trillion, I think it was. It's an unbelievable amount. The sad part is when you use the Hypernet, you have to pay like a 5 to 10% tax. So I think they lost like quite a bit of money just trying to put it on the market to sell it in a lottery situation. So anyway, let's see what happened with this thing. Pro God Legend didn't mastermind that sale, but he was involved with something. Shall we talk about the Hypernet? It's kind of interesting. But when the Hypernet came out, it was this in-game mechanic for something that players had done for years before. A long time ago in EVE Online, you used to have what were lotteries inside of corporations. So you would have a corporation, and one of the wealthier fellows in the corporation would say, oh, I've got some nice ships, and I want to, like, I don't want to lose money and give them away. I don't really want to sell them. because people can't really afford them or whatever. So what they would do is have a little lottery, and it would kind of generate interest within the corporation. And it was like a nice little thing to do, like playing poker with your buddies inside the corporation. So somebody would put out a ship, and they would give out lottery tickets to it. People would buy up the lottery tickets, and then somebody would win. And so the seller, broke even or made a little money, and somebody in the corporation was rewarded with a nice ship. And those were the corporate lotteries. Those later turned into like alliance level lotteries as they got bigger, more people. It was always nice stuff that they were selling. It wasn't just pedestrian stuff. It was usually nice stuff. And then somebody went big, and they made the EVE Online lottery, and they sold tickets out there to the public. And that was all third party, all player created, and it created, annual events around lotteries and stuff like that. And then you had a group that really formalized that process called Summerblink. And Summerblink was just super efficient and allowed this to happen on a mass scale. And then after Summerblink got in trouble because they leveraged free stuff that CCP had given them into their process, which resulted in real money, and it became this RMT triangle that they got into. And CCP said, nope, can't do that. And they took away everything Summerblink had and shut them down. And at the very time that Summerblink went down, this new group was coming up with, they weren't selling ships, but they were actually just gambling. And that was I Want ISK. So I Want ISK inherited all those lottery players from Summerblink, and they just exploded in popularity. And so I Want ISK started raking in a bunch of people who wanted to play games of chance. And their trick was a little bit different. They weren't giving out items. They were giving out like lottery tickets, and you would pay ISK in and you get ISK out. And at that point, you had streaming was starting to happen. So you had Iron Bank as part of I Want ISK out there doing a show that was primarily just buying up lottery slots and getting paid. And so it was like you were gambling. And he was very engaging, and so it was a fun time for these guys, and they a lot of them actually really enjoyed it. So that was what was going on with I Want ISK. Then I Want ISK tried to sponsor some things and ended up they sponsored things with EVE NT. I don't know if you remember that, but the guy that owned EVE NT, and his name is slipping at the moment. Nice guy, real life gregarious guy. Everybody likes him, and he put together all the stuff that you see coming out of EVE NT. He's the guy that did all that. And so he did this thing where they basically, I Want ISK and him teamed up. No, it wasn't Ithaca Hawk. It was, I'm ashamed of myself for forgetting because he's a good guy and very popular. He doesn't play EVE Online right now. Well, he put a Titan out and said, come kill this Titan in high-sec. So all these people came to the Titan and started killing it. And he said, well, let's make it more interesting. So let's get a defense fleet up. And no, it wasn't Kriba. I'm going to figure out who that was in a second. It'll come to me. He was a CSM member like 3 years ago. So it wasn't that long ago. And I Want ISK sponsored the event. So I Want ISK put a bunch of money into it, bought the Titan, whatever, and paid him a healthy ISK amount to do this event. Because remember, he was doing events. That's what he wanted to do. And he put it out there, and to make it more interesting, he brought a defense fleet in. The defense fleet was so potent that they killed off all the people trying to kill the Titan. Thank you, Nash Cadaver. Thank you so much. Nash Cadaver is who I'm talking about. He and I Want ISK teamed up for this Titan event. And the defense fleet was so good, they killed everybody that came to kill the Titan pretty much. And then the Titan finally, they blew it up, I think the defense fleet was like, okay, well, we're not supposed to win, so let's kill the Titan or whatever. So then they killed the Titan. But before the Titan went down, they took off all the fittings. They just took all the fittings off the Titan. So, oh, what's up? My friend Dirk is here. What's up, Dirk?
What's going on, bro? How are you?
What's going on? I was talking about Nash Cadaver and I Want Isk and how they did that event. I'm talking about the history of lotteries. Actually, you'd be really good at this. Over the years and how it led to the Hypernet. And I was talking about I Want Isk and how they came up after Summerblink and inherited a bunch of client share. And then they did some event with Nash Cadaver that went wrong. There was a big fight between them and they said they would never work with each other again. And then I Want Isk and Iron Bank were a team of sorts, and they had a streaming show going that Iron Bank did, engaging fellow, as I said, and had a little gambling show. Well, something happened between, I remember what it was. I Want Isk didn't use his own money or his own Isk to fund this thing. What he did is he set up a system and he hired people, or he allowed 5-10 people to become bankers, which are basically clerks. And so they would loan out their own money and they would pay clients, they would pay winnings to clients, and then they would accept tickets and they would work in shifts. And so if you worked a shift with your own money, you could make about 10% of your holding. So if I had 200 billion ISK and I worked a couple hours, collecting ticket sales and giving out rewards, I made about 20 billion. So it was a good way for people to grow their money and engage in community, right? So they had like 10, 20 bankers. All of them had to have at least 200 billion ISK liquid so that they could cover the floor. And then if those guys needed money, they would go to what's called a big banker. And there was only like 3 or 4 of those. And the big bankers had to have like 2 trillion liquid on hand at all times. And so he basically set up this pyramid of loaning and transacting money. And I Want Isk was raking in a lot of the profits. Well, what was happening was there was this guy at I Want Isk had a bunch of friends, and a lot of them were in a group called SMA or Space Monkeys Alliance, which was part of the Imperium up in the north. And they were actually in a corporation together and for a short time. But what happened is a corporation inside of SMA knew that these bankers were prime targets because they knew they had a ton of money. So what they would do is, not on purpose, but they were kind of friendly with the I Want Isk guys. But when they had a falling out, they would kick the banker out and they would keep his money. And so one guy, they kept about 80 billion of his money. And then a few months later, and that guy kind of left the game because he got nailed for RMT and he didn't want to fight it. He could have been guilty or he didn't want to fight it. Somewhere in there, he didn't return to the game, but it probably sucked that he lost 80 billion too, right? To this corporation that kicked him out because he was a director in that corp. So I Want Isk loses a banker. And then it happens again. And then a third time. And I think it was Paul Wood that he got all his money taken away. And so I Want Isk got mad and said, hey, corporation inside of SMA, you're stealing money from my bankers. If you steal their money, they can't be bankers for me. So we got a problem. I would like for you, and he would say it in a very nice way, please give them their money back instead of keeping all their money when you kick them out. And they said, basically, and this was actually very particular, said, they say, like, go suck eat a bag of dicks or something. It was a really like derogatory term at the time. And he said, look, if you're, let me talk to the leader instead of the diplomat, right? And he said, I already talked to the leader. Leader doesn't want to talk to you. The leader of SMA doesn't want to talk to you. And so get lost, basically. And so I Want Isk was really upset, really mad. There's a lot of close ties here between SMA and I Want Isk. So it's not like they're strangers to one another, but this diplomat was not a part of that. So he was a little bit out of his element. And it ended up getting, I don't want to go too far into it, but it ended up getting pretty hostile. And so I Want Isk hired mercenaries and said, harass SMA and just destroy their ability to, live in peace. And that is one of the elements that led to the World War B in 2016, which saw SMA collapse into the Imperium, and the Imperium actually collapse and lose all its space. And 2016's World War B, as they called it, they also call it the Casino War because it was funded mostly by I Want ISK. So it depends on who you ask about that name for that war in 2016. What?
Casino War B.
Yeah, Casino War B.
Just to cover both sides.
Yeah, everybody's happy with that one. Actually, it's funny because I was at INN at the time. It was TMC at that time, I believe. And I said, look, we have 4 or 5 different names for this war, just like we do this one, right? This new war that we're in now, we have like 3 or 4 different names for it. And back then, the same thing. Everybody wanted to control the war. Everybody wanted to name the war, which was kind of silly because in EVE Online, we don't name the war. People just refer to something and whatever sticks. But nobody really wanted to own the name of the war. But after a while, you have this whole generation that happened around World War B times, I'm going to call it that. It was that they wanted to name the war. So somebody said it's the Easter War. Somebody said it was...
Well, I was going to say, I didn't think that there was a name for it until I think in some news report or something like that, CCP referred to it as the Easter War.
Yes.
Then people were, like up in arms that CCP were like calling it something that didn't make any sense to begin with, but like, whatever.
Well, they didn't like the name Easter War, but they didn't think it was taking sides until later. When they called it World War B. And then the Imperium got mad and said, hey, you're playing right into the narratives of our enemy. Why are you picking sides? And CCP was like, hey, man, we just want to publicize this war. So it was a big deal. Picking the name turned out to be a big deal because the name was part of the narrative. And it was really a poisonous time for talking about that war, which you and I, actually, that exact moment that war started was when Talking in Stations started. So 2016, April.
Pretty much,
yeah, almost 5 years ago.
I don't know about I don't think when it started, when it really heated up. Obviously that stuff with Space Monkeys Alliance and whatnot, and then Losec Voltron and some other stuff like had happened before that, right? There was kind of like a more of a burn before what I would say the real meat of the war happened. But Talking in Stations began when the real meat of the war kind of kicked in.
We began the exact week that the move ops began. Like the first 2 episodes of Talking in Stations were you, me, Drayden, Ashtarothi too. And we were looking on the map and saying, hey, Northern Coalition has just moved through Iridia. Like that was our first or second show. And then watching Test move up through Geminate and PL too. Or PL was up there first. So that we were watching the troop movements that were assembling and we're like, something's going on here. Like nobody was talking about it in public at the time, but we were saying something's going on and it looks pretty big because for NC to move, they have to be hired by a lot of money. And it turns out they were. They were given at least 3 months of their equivalent moon rental at the time, which was considerable since they rented so much space. So they were paid quite a bit. So was PL, so was Test, all those groups. But anyway, so I like that because I was like 5 years ago, almost exactly, or in a couple months, it'll be like 5 years ago. That was popularly known as World War B. I have to admit, I fought against the name because I thought it was narrative driven. So as the editor of INN at the time, I was saying, let's name this war in a neutral way so we can refer to it, but let's not get memey with it or whatever. So I picked, as the editor, I said, this war, when we write about it, will be called... Oh, actually, I remember what happened. Yeah, this war will be called the Mercenary War, right? It's kind of basic. There are mercenaries. That's who's coming to destroy this empire. And I like the idea of a classical mercenaries hired by an iron bank to attack an empire. It just had really nice epic themes associated with it. And then Matani says, Matani comes in like a week later and says, we're going to call this war, and I forget what it was, War of Solveless Aggression.
The War of Solveless Aggression. Yeah. And I remember us having the conversation being like, I think that's a little too deep for most people.
Yeah. It had to be a Civil War, like a Civil War historian to get that. But he was trying to do the opposite, unsuccessfully at the time, which was to say, guys that don't have sovereignty are taking the people who have sovereignty on to destroy us, and they're going to win. So your game sucks, CCP, because people who don't have any skin in the game can destroy people who have skin in the game. Your game is totally imbalanced. And so it was kind of a meta play against CCP and the incentives that were around for CCP at the time, or CCP was creating for people. And it was a commentary on that you didn't have to own anything. You could just roam around like a marauder and just destroy things.
This big Civil War reference was to the Anaconda Plan, but that was interpreted in a more amusing way.
Right. Well, the thing was, it was unassailable wealth became a big term in 2016 because Iron Bank and Iwan Isk didn't have anything in the game to destroy. And yet they had an ISK generating machine. So they could constantly pour wealth into the pockets of these guys that didn't have to own any space because they were getting rich anyway without having to own space, without even having to rent it, without having to do any farming or harvesting. They had no limits. They were pure military. And that's what that was a comment on. So the Imperium did lose. Actually, they hardly fought that war. They fought 2 battles, and the first one they were outnumbered. They brought 800 people to a fight. They came a little late, by the way, so it wouldn't have mattered.
As far as the big fights went, I mean, you got to remember that. I mean, there was battling that was taking place over in, what was it, Veil of the Silent and whatnot on that, on that sort of front. Obviously, what was going on,
CO2 was feeding a lot.
Well, CO2 was in tribute. Carneros' group, which
Bastion,
for some reason, Bastion. was over in Veil of the Silent and things like that, and that's really where a lot of the the big enemy sort of came from that direction first, right?
Well, yeah, it's interesting. I think I talked to Vili afterwards, and Vili was a very important part of this actually going through because ProGod and Vili brought Test into it against the Imperium, and that was a lot of people. So now what that meant was that PL and NC together wouldn't be overrun by the Imperium that had more people because it was an N+1 game way back then. So when Test joined, they thought, now we have enough people. Now we have enough people to compete. And that's exactly what happened because the Imperium brought 800 people to a fight, which is normally big enough to defend. I think at the time it was like what we call the baby Titan, which is, it was in a pause and there was, what do you call it? An array, super capital array. And there was a Titan or 2 in it that belonged to a group. I think it was FCON. And so the Imperium showed up to defend it. So it wasn't strategically a very important target, but it was Titans. And at the time that was still a big deal. And they brought 800 people, which should have been way more than enough to defeat their enemies. But their enemies together formed 1,200, and it just blew everybody's mind. So then the next fight, the Imperium essentially blew the horn and said, come on, this is it. We're fighting for our lives. So they showed up with 1,400 or 12. Actually, they showed up with 1,200. So they matched the fight before and they were ready to go. But by then the publicity was out and 2,400 people showed up against the Imperium. So they were swamped. And at that point, there was just no combination of, reactivating people that was ever going to get them to 2,400. So instead of fighting at that time, it was a different time, the Imperium decided that they would withdraw tactically. So they started moving everything into one area and they started moving backwards. There's a lot of military stuff to talk about for this World War B, as it's popularly known. But I won't get into it. We'll need Elise to analyze how things broke apart. But you had FCON attacked and broken apart. They were too late to retreat, so they got stuck out. CO2 decided, they looked at their options and said, we don't like Imperium anyway, so we're going to flip sides, which created a grudge, which, came to fruition during Judgment Day months later. And there was a lot of groups leaving the Imperium at the time. And really only like 4 groups stuck around: Executive Outcomes, Lawn, Bastion, and Initiative was involved.
TNT, the Initiative was right. Yeah, I mean.
Yeah, TNT. I kind of put Initiative as kind of a co-group, but yeah, Initiative was definitely part of that. And so those groups stuck around, fought it out, and then I think the war ended. And I've always said this: World War B ended when Sort Dragon, who was fighting Imperium at the time, put down the first nullsec keepstar in Declan. I mean, they'd already retreated, and they were fighting in lowsec. Titans had come out. They'd changed in nature. These new faxes had come out. They were brand new at the time, and people were trying to figure out how to use those. And structures were coming out. And I think Fortizar came out first, or Astra House Fortizar, and then the Keepstar came out. So it wasn't all at the same time. But when the Keepstar fell and was planted, I think at that point it could not be prevented because its timer wasn't affected by tie-dye. And so it could always, all you need to do is get enough people in there, create tie-dye, and there would be no way to destroy the Keepstar. So it was planted. And at that point, I don't think there was any reasonable way to take out a Keepstar. So they would always have a foothold in your territory, even if you reconquered it. And I think that is when the Imperium said, let's look, we want to start over anyway to build a new empire in a new way with these new structures. And they looked at Delve, which at the time had a bunch of different alliances in it that weren't very strong. And they just said, we'll go there. We're familiar with it. So that was it. Okay. And this brings me all the way back to Iwan Isk, which funded that war. And so there's a lot of complaints about unassailable wealth. So CCP basically was, at the time, they were starting to do business in England. England had strict gambling laws. And I believe there was some precedent in the gaming industry about these I don't know what they were, but there was elements of gambling that were being dealt with by the courts. So CCP decided it was a good time to say, no more of this gambling stuff. So they wiped it all out, banned a few people for RMT and for gambling. And they said, no games of chance, period. But what that did was it was a giant cleaning of the slate. But all the people who had corporations that kind of did these small lotteries didn't have an avenue for it. And so at the time, CCP said, we're moving all these games of chance out. We may come back to this and put something in the game that is a game of chance, but it'll be something that we do, where we're the banker instead of some third-party player. I'm going to answer this question here from a new guy. I think it just went by. Sorry, I'm not a vet. How did Iwan Isk get so much money? Well, their way of making money is a little complex. If you want to know about it, there's an article I wrote called Behind the War Between SMA and IWI. Iwan Isk. I'll find it for you right now, actually. I wrote it. It goes into all that stuff. Matterall. Behind the War Between SMA and Iwan Isk. Something like that. There it is. This article took me about a week to write. I did a ton of research on it. And I got to know everybody involved. And I took my time. Now remember, I'm the editor of INN at the time. So I write this article, and it's not celebrating the power and the might of the Imperium. It's very critical of the Imperium, actually. But I think it was a pretty good. I took a lot of heat, I think, from a horrendous who thought I was too close to Iwan Isk. But I didn't know Iwan Isk, and I didn't want to hang out with them or anything. But I admired what they had built, and I saw like there was a lot of miserable bankers that had been banned at the time. So I wrote this when the bankers had been banned, and that would have been December 2015. 2016, one of those two. Anyway, off topic. So that was that. If you want to know more about it, there it is. So what happens is that CCP decides, well, we did want to preserve that. That was kind of Eve-esque. So I bet it was just one programmer who said, I think I can build something, and did. And you have this Hypernet that was built. And it's interesting because I think it was 2 years ago, a year ago from Christmas, where they were having a fireside chat, and it was Hilmar and Berger talking, and they said, we have this thing coming out, but we're not going to talk about it. And then they kept going. So they had a 4-hour conversation, and they just said they had this thing that was coming, but they weren't going to talk about it. And the thing that they didn't want to talk about was the Hypernet, which came out in January, about a year ago right now, right?
So in December.
Did it come out in December? Yes, right before Christmas, I think.
I remember shortly before Christmas, I spent most of the disk I had on it, and then when I first started doing nullsec anomaly routing, because that's how I started funding it.
Yeah. Question about IWAN-ISK, did they have actual players? Yeah, all those guys were players in the game. Some of them have been played since 2003, and they just kind of were working with the fortune they built, trying to make a little more money on it. But they were all kind of hanging out. I got the impression a lot of them were, just kind of playing a little bit here and there, and mostly hung out with other Eve players. But none of them were, except Killer B actually was an active big name. He was a banker for IWAN-ISK. And actually he got, when the bank got banned, he got all his money taken away, but by then he'd already bought a Vanquisher. So his Vanquisher was spared. They didn't take assets, they just took ISK. So I think he lost like 400 billion or something, some big number. Yeah, so that's the story of gambling in EVE Online. It went from small lotteries among players to industry to unassailable assets to being wiped out, and then you have CCP bringing in their own set of gambling tools, and that's what the Hypernet is. And so that was really popular when it came out, right? As Gregorian says, he spent all his money on it. And that is the instrument that was being used to try to sell this Raven state issue that tanked. So what ProGod was trying to do, what ProGod was trying to do was set up a gentleman's club that would be exclusive. So you could buy rights to be inside this club, which would give you access codes to these lotteries that were going on. So it was kind of, it would be like a gentleman's experience kind of thing. And their big flagship or tentpole event was this very, very rare Raven state issue. So that's how ProGod ties into it. ProGod was endorsing the concept of having an exclusive Discord where people would buy tickets to lotteries and that sort of stuff. And this was like showing you the power of that kind of organization. Look at the kind of stuff we can sell here for the discriminating man, but when this sale failed, I think so did the concept. I have just about lost my voice. Like I think I'm only good for a half hour straight, and then starts to clamp up. All right. Yeah, the High Rollers Club. It might have even been called the High Rollers Club, but that was the idea of it. So that didn't sell, and we hadn't heard about this since then, but here it is. Good evening, EVE Online peeps. For the past few years, I have periodically been putting this up for sale with some good offers, but nothing that really wowed me. This is the 2020 selling post. This is the 2020 post selling this wonderful ship. So this is going on sale. I don't know if it's been sold yet. We'll look at the bottom here. The starting bid is at 2.5 trillion. It's equivalent to an AT ship, or equivalent in AT ships or Plex. And the reason he'll take AT ships is because he owns a lot of AT ships, so he's a collector of rare ships, which is probably why he has this one. By the way, Blue Melon is, if I'm not mistaken, also the guy that walked off with a bunch of AT ships that he was entrusted with by Pandemic Legion. So this guy kind of has a little bit of, I don't know, how would you put that, Dirk?
Notoriety?
Yeah, notoriety.
Infamy? I don't know.
Infamy, yeah. He was a very trusted guy, part of the Alliance tournament team from Pandemic Legion. Pandemic Legion dominated Alliance tournament for like 5 years. So they got a bunch of blueprints, bunch of ships. And Blue Melon was somebody that would distribute them as needed. And then he decided to walk off and took them with him. And then he made it. The thing that bothered me is he said, oh, this is to get back at PL because they killed me when I was a young man. And I always thought I would somehow come back and pay them back for that revenge. And it was just a little bit thin because he'd been, a part of PL for so long, and he really just kind of inherited trust, and then he walked off with it. Anyway, so let's have a look. Let's just go to the end and see if there was a final result. I don't know if there was a final result. Sold, there it is. Blue Melon says it's sold, and stop responding completely after I sent you contact. This is now pending sale for, here's the winner, Phoenix Pride. Let's do an Eve Who on that guy.
What's it end up going for or whatever?
It's possible he sold it to a friend, but I think when you lose your reputation, you can't really be trusted afterwards. And I don't know who this is or what he does, but he very well may have paid whatever the amount was. Let's see if we can find his bid. Here it is. Well, I never saw it go over 2.5 T, so pending sale is 2.5 T, and so that might be what this guy paid if he's indeed an actual buyer. The problem with Eve is this is all obscured. We don't know. We could talk to Blue Melon. We'd have to take his word for it, but I don't think anybody sells this. I
thought the 2.5 was just the starting bid, and we don't know what the final one was.
Well, he didn't go from 2.5 to 3. I'll tell you that. Who would, right? You'd go 2.5, 2.7, 2.6. So it's probably not, there weren't many bids after that. So I don't know. But far less than the Hypernet would have gotten them, because if they'd sold it on the Hypernet, that thing would have sold for 4 trillion. So anyway, rare sale. Could celebrate that if it indeed went through. Yeah, a ship that you will never use. So I think, I don't know. There are people who just need to put their wealth someplace, and this thing will definitely hold its value. So I once talked to somebody, and I said, because I had some money and they were buying like a diamond ring or something I wouldn't buy. And I said, why don't you just buy a washing machine or something useful that you can work with? No, washing machine. Like something simple that would be useful for a while instead of, well, actually, the guy was buying a ring for his wife, and she wanted a washing machine. So I was like, well, I can see the washing machine has a use, and but a diamond ring is just like. And then he said something that totally changed my mind. He goes, a washing machine doesn't hold its value. And I was like, oh,
that's a diamond, though.
It's a good point. I think a diamond holds its value.
No, because the De Beers cartel controls the prices and sells them for much higher than they're actually worth, since they own most of the mines.
Yeah, I know.
So reselling diamonds is not going to get you nearly what you bought it for.
Right. Okay. So maybe a bad example. But the point is that precious anything holds its value. like this Raven State issue will hold its value. So it's not a bad investment. There will always be somebody who wants that ship, especially because it cost 2.5 trillion. And if you think that's a lot of ISK, it is. It's an absurd amount of ISK that I will never come close to, or anybody, 90%, 99% of ETH players won't. But there are people who have been playing this game a long time that have accumulated a lot of ISK. And I know probably 3 or 4, one specifically that has like 50 trillion ISK. So they exist, those people. And so this kind of a ship isn't something that would set them back, but it is a prize to have. As long as it keeps being considered a prize, then it'll hold its value. All right, let's see what else we got in the news. There's a 45-minute explanation of a sale of a ship. Well, I'll follow your lead, Gregorian. What else is in the news that is important?
Well, today, Dreadbomb killed a Titan that jumped to a citadel and was not able to tether, as I understand the explanation.
Well, they can't tether for 30 seconds, so here it is.
Because it didn't have a core.
Oh my God, the structure didn't have a core. Oh, wow. That's a great find. Remember, on the 12th, that was the last day, you had to put a core into a structure. If you didn't, you could no longer tether to that structure. And this is the first kill associated with that. That is really cool.
Yeah, I think there might have been 1 or 2 super carriers earlier, but this was the first Titan.
What a bad deal.
Yeah, Dreadbomb as an alliance has been getting a lot of interesting content recently. I've invited their leader Seto to come on to TIS, and he said he might be interested when he's around, so maybe next week we'll have him on.
Yeah, we did talk. He was going to be busy, I think, in December. So I thought once things settle down a little in the war, it'd be a good time to bring him on. Seto being the leader of Dreadbomb, and they are active in Wicked Creek. That looks like where they killed this one here. Okay, so Billy says, oh, I think Billy knows about this one. It's just a highway Keepstar, so we didn't bother coring it. Odd he didn't dock. Okay, so the situation's a little bit different than I thought. I thought he jumped to a Fortizar or something, couldn't tether for 30 seconds at first. And then they said it probably wasn't cored. Gregorian did. And that would change the whole situation as I explained. But that's probably not what happened in this situation. The guy jumped to a Keepstar and couldn't tether because it didn't have a core. But that isn't necessary for him. He should have docked because he could have done that, I believe, after 30 seconds. I'm not sure. Do you have to wait 30 seconds to dock, or was that?
No, you do not.
So you can just dock right away. I don't know what happened then for this guy here. Nocturum 129. Well, it's interesting. Vili just admitted they haven't cored up those Keepstars. So those things are super expensive to core up. So those Keepstars don't have tether, but they also don't need tether unless they're going to be in a combat situation. And you can put a core into a Keepstar at any time. So if you're preparing it for battle, you can just add the core then. So it's probably a smart move not to core up everything that you own if you're not going to keep it. And this is the trail of Keepstars from Catch all the way over to Aquarius and now into Delve is not necessarily a foundation for home or empire. It's a road. It's a railroad to bring supplies from one region to another in a safe way. And that's how the Pappy fleet, Super Capital fleet, managed to get all the way into Delve without any problems. Oh, so he got pointed right away on there. Anyway, good kill by Sado and his crew. And okay. What else you got, Gregorian? Anything else out there?
That's well, actually, during the TAS show 2 days ago, Dreadbomb and Wrecking Crew had a fight over some structure, so a timer and catch against Legacy. And one of the really interesting things that I saw on that battle report was that one of Legacy's monitor pilots was Arcadio's Soul from Severance, who was the main fleet commander of Wrecking Crew during its final. I mean, during Prob V Block during their final days against Wrecking Crew.
What's his name?
Arcadios Soul.
Arcadios. Don't see him. I might be spelling it wrong.
ARKADIOS space SOL.
There. All right. Well, anyway, that's cool. So it's Titan kill. Let's see. Let's look at that.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting to see that he's. And earlier today, there were some fights over Delve iHubs. It looks like Pappy is starting to has been regaining momentum over the past week or so after the first week of after the whole unfortunate incident. Pappy did not have momentum. It looks like things are starting to swing back into Pappy's favor. And
well, what makes you say that?
Obviously, I'm a somewhat biased source, but it feels like we're getting people more. We're after during the first week or so. That felt like the first fights we'd actually lost in a while in terms of subcapital fights, as well as the obviously not doing too well in the capital one. And we had been outformed for the first time pretty much ever. But while USTZ, the Imperium, still sometimes outnumbers us and sometimes beats us, we've started to outform them again, and we've started winning a lot of objectives again.
All right, we'll keep an eye on that. There was definitely a momentum switch, I think, as soon as we had the big red boat on our live stream. He was like, I would say we were losing before this, but now we've caught up. And I think he understated it. They didn't catch up. They actually started winning. If you're tracking the war at that point, you have a lot of assets stuck in M2, which is right over here. Sorry, it's a little bit lower. Here it is. And those assets were stuck or pre-staged, as Pappy liked to say, for the next fight. The next fight went totally wrong for them. They lost 150, 165 Titans. They got 90 of them back, or some portion of them back. But they still lost all momentum, and they were still stuck. So those are two bad things. So being stuck is really the one that was the lasting problem, because they were able to probably recover with supplies, getting people back in the Titans and reconstituting. But what they couldn't do is use their heavy artillery in the form of Titans and super carriers or Titans to really leverage their power. So there was definitely a slow reconstituting of Pappy. That fight took a lot out of him. And Goonswarm, I think they kind of went on a rampage and reset a bunch of iHubs, therefore setting back the clock on a lot of potential Keepstar kills of theirs. They saved those for at least 30 days. And now it's up to, I mean, these are big groups, so you have to slowly start building people back up. It's almost good to give them a rest, but not let them rest too long, because they might walk away from the whole campaign. So it looks like they're getting back on their feet if what you're telling me is true. And I do see a lot of disturbance in the iHubs here. All the stuff that Connie took over looks like it's getting reinforced. But so is some test stuff here and NC dot up here. So it looks like it's a back and forth. We'll see how these all play out in the future. And you guys, are you seeing equal numbers now? You were saying you got outformed, but generally, do you know what the numbers
We've started to have get back to, in some fights, 1.5 to 1, which was what we were at before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so Wormia says they still haven't tried a breakout. They need to pull off the Band-Aid, which means get it all done at once. I don't think that's how a breakout works. I don't remember a giant breakout attempt when PL was trapped under the thumb of test. It was a little at a time, near every downtime, and by the time a good portion of them broke out, like 3 or 4 days later, there just wasn't nearly as many as we thought were in there. So that's happened many times in EVE Online. If you look at some of the very first dead zoned station, stayed dead zone for 2 years, and we thought there was a treasure trove of stuff in it. When that dead zone was finally lifted, there was hardly anything in it, because over time things had escaped.
I've heard about people getting their stuff out when they noticed that the Imperium wasn't looking at for a second, but since all my capital ships are in either T5Z, Keepstar, or NPC Delve, I'm not in the channels to get the pings for lost capitals. So,
yeah. Well, that's probably a pretty tight, secure place, I would imagine. You want that to be the need to know only. But again, PL, actually with the help of Elo Knight, was able to extract really well from UALX in 2018. PL, as Vili has stated, is now on the same side as test. So those tips and tricks are being used now to extricate them, or to extract them. And we don't know who's left down there. There might be a bunch of Titans down there, or a lot of them may have come out. I don't know. I think the Imperium had put out some numbers on Sunday. I don't know how accurate those were. They think they have like 300 or so. Yeah, Elo Knight is also fighting over on the Imperium side, so maybe Elo Knight knows how to counter the escape. Not quite sure. So we assume there's still a bunch trapped down there, but I don't actually know. And I've always been surprised at how little is trapped in the last 4 or 5 cases in EVE history where that has happened. But we'll see. And at some point, it will reveal itself either all at once, or they were just never there. Who knows? I think it'd be inaccurate to assume that nothing's there, because that was a lot of Titans. Be surprised if there was less than 100 or whatever. That would be awfully low, but I'm not sure. Dress Cisnero says, if you listen to the Fireside, Matani said how we did it. I didn't listen to the Fireside, sorry, but maybe it's worth listening to. Yeah, I know there's locator agents. There's also making sure that you don't really chance it. So you want to recap with downtime sitting behind your back to backstop you. And that just means you log in right before downtime. So when you log in, you recap, downtime comes, shuts off the game, you don't get killed, and the next time you log in, you're going to have full cap. So, there's lots of tricks like that. It's very interesting gameplay, very high level stuff. Clearly, they have the knowledge to wiggle out of this if possible. But the Imperium also has the knowledge to counter wiggling out of it. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. I missed a comment there by Rain Chocolate. Let me go back for it. There really isn't a way to encounter. The tools used to get out are pretty public in terms of leadership and knowledge. That's probably true at this point. And she meant counter. So there isn't a way to counter. I think there's some truth to that. She knows better than I do these days about what they're doing in order to get out of there. But I really don't think that's a killing blow in this war. They'll just slowly get out from under it. But it did stomp their momentum. And I think you would have seen a really, really momentous fight on that second timer in M2 that really would have, I think that would have set one side or the other back in a significant way by the end of that. Maybe both sides, which would have been great. Go ahead, Gordon.
Yeah, I think that it had the possibility to be a killing blow. They just the Imperium just didn't leverage it enough to make it into a killing blow.
You know, it's hard. I want to commend both sides. They have very, very experienced players with a ton of pressure on them to succeed. And any of us would fail and whelp and feed and whatever else and just totally be destroyed by now. But these are high-level knife fighters in a ring, and they have a ton of responsibility on their shoulders in that they represent thousands and thousands of dollars of assets that belong to other people. And so they've got to balance being correct, being bold, being inspiring at the same time, not making mistakes. They've got to also manage the fatigue level of their troops. They've got to manage the signal. And on all sides of this war, you're seeing that play out at the highest levels for a very long time. So both sides are doing an amazing job. If Pappy manages to come out of this and start fighting again, that is a pretty strong comeback from a pretty ugly defeat. Could say, and you could say it was a service defeated them, or it was Imperium that killed. Who knows where you categorize that? But surviving that, not quitting, not getting discouraged alone is a pretty strong indication of good leadership. On the other side, you have the Imperium strategically being on top of things. They started the first M2 unexpectedly, I think, and they stuck it out, and they literally put everything on the table and came out ahead. And that takes a lot of confidence to do something like that. So both sides playing very, very, very top shelf game during this war, especially now. Stakes are high and things actually hurt. And that's what we like to see. We like to see people make decisions when there's actual pain on the other side of a bad decision. All right. I have lost my voice, it turns out. We're going to send you over to Open Comms now to hang out with the guys. I'll go over there and just kind of lurk. But we'll see you over there on the other side. Thanks for hanging out. Sorry this week's been crazy. It's been crazy in real life, as you know. I may have more to say about that at a different time, but not right now. So next week, we hope to get back on schedule and see you in EVE Online. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. We will see you next time. Oh, and check in on Sunday. We'll have a good show on Sunday with our panelists. All right. Until then, take care.